He was a billionaire who thought money could buy anything, until he met her. One puzzle, one challenge, and everything was on the line. What happened next? You won't believe it. The billionaire had everything money could buy. Massive mansions perched atop hills with panoramic views, luxury yachts that sliced through crystal blue waters, private jets that could cross continents in a few hours, all the trappings of a life many could only dream of. Yet, as he looked around his opulent office, surrounded by priceless art and sparkling chandeliers, a wave of boredom washed over him. He had conquered business empires, collected accolades, and amassed wealth that could last centuries. Still, none of it thrilled him anymore. Power, money, influence, he had them all. What he lacked was challenge, amusement, and that rare spark of unpredictability that could ignite excitement in his otherwise sterile world. One rainy afternoon, dressed in a tailored designer suit that screamed authority, he found himself wandering the streets of downtown, far away from the glossy world he owned. The city's heartbeat pulsed around him, street vendors shouting their wares, the hum of traffic, the chatter of office workers on lunch break. It was ordinary, mundane, and yet somehow fascinating. The ordinary had a strange allure to him, like an unsolved puzzle begging to be cracked. That's when he saw her. A waitress. Ordinary, unassuming. Nothing like the models and socialites he usually encountered in high-end events. Her uniform was simple, her apron slightly wrinkled, her shoes scuffed from hours of work. But there was something about her, an energy, a spark, an unmistakable presence that drew his attention. She moved with purpose, attending to customers with an efficiency that suggested she had mastered the art of multitasking. Yet, beyond her competence, there was something more subtle, more elusive, a quiet confidence, a fire in her eyes, a mind that seemed alive with thoughts most would overlook. He approached the diner, the bell above the door jingling softly as he entered. The smell of coffee, fresh pastries, and fried eggs filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of rain from the street outside. Patrons looked up briefly, then returned to their meals. No one paid much attention to the man in the designer suit, until he reached the counter. She glanced at him, offering a polite smile, expecting another typical customer. Perhaps someone would order the most expensive coffee, maybe ask for the fanciest sandwich on the menu. But he wasn't there for the menu. He had come for curiosity, for the thrill of watching someone think, react, and, if lucky, impress him in ways he hadn't yet experienced. With a calculated smirk, he placed a crisp sheet of paper on the counter. It wasn't just any paper. On it were numbers, symbols, and patterns that twisted and coiled like a maze, forming a puzzle so intricate that it would have made seasoned mathematicians pause. His voice was calm, tinged with amusement. "Solve this," he said, almost casually, though every syllable dripped with challenge. "Solve this, and I'll give you everything." The words hung in the air, heavy with tension, as if daring the universe itself to respond. A hush fell over the diner. Conversations halted mid-sentence, eyes flicked toward the counter. Patrons sensed the spectacle about to unfold, though they couldn't understand why. The billionaire's challenge was more than a test of intellect. It was a test of ego, a spectacle of arrogance wrapped in an air of invincibility. Everyone laughed. The regulars chuckled, assuming this was some rich man's joke, an eccentric showing off his wealth and superiority. Even some of the staff rolled their eyes, dismissing it as nonsense. Who in their right mind could solve something designed to tease a billionaire's amusement? It was impossible. They saw the glint of arrogance in his eyes and assumed it would be met with ridicule, not success. Everyone, except her. She looked at the paper, then at him, then back again. No laughter escaped her lips. No hesitation clouded her gaze. There was only curiosity, mixed with a spark of determination. Her mind began to whirl, dissecting patterns, tracing numbers, exploring angles. While the rest of the diner saw arrogance, she saw a challenge. While others saw wealth flaunted as intimidation, she saw an opportunity to prove that intelligence and wit could outshine money and status. The billionaire leaned back, watching her with a mix of expectation and disbelief. He had seen people crumble under pressure, stumble when faced with complexity. He had never seen anyone approach such a puzzle with calm focus. Most would panic, laugh nervously, or abandon the task entirely. Most were too accustomed to being told what to do, too used to taking shortcuts, too distracted by desire for reward. She was none of that. Minutes passed. Then 10. Then 15. The diner's usual hum of activity faded into the background as all attention subtly shifted to this extraordinary moment. She worked silently, her pen scratching across the paper in a rhythm that seemed almost musical, methodical yet inspired. Patrons stole glances, captivated by the unfolding scene. The tension was electric, almost tangible. And yet, there was more. He noticed it, the way she paused occasionally, tilted her head, smiled faintly at her own calculations. Not arrogance, not defiance, but quiet confidence. A mind that thrived on challenge, that welcomed complexity rather than fearing it. It fascinated him, unnerved him. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of uncertainty, a twinge of doubt. Could she actually? As he watched, something stirred within him, a mix of respect, disbelief, and perhaps a hint of admiration. Here was a person who had nothing to lose yet everything to prove, someone untouched by the blinding influence of wealth and privilege. In that moment, the puzzle was no longer just about money. It was about intellect, character, and the rare spark of human brilliance that could challenge even the most arrogant mind. And so, the billionaire waited, smirk fading slightly, eyes fixed on her every move, heart unknowingly pounding with anticipation. The diner had become a stage, the puzzle a silent duel, and the outcome uncertain. No one knew what would happen next. No one dared guess. And yet, all of them, rich, poor, stranger, friend, felt the electric pull of what was about to unfold, because sometimes the greatest stories start with a simple dare, and a challenge that seems impossible. She didn't hesitate. The moment the billionaire placed the intricate puzzle in front of her, a quiet determination settled over her. There was no hesitation, no nervous glance, no timid questioning. Just a deep, unwavering focus that seemed almost magnetic. In a diner full of chatter, clinking dishes, and the soft hum of the refrigerator, she became a world of her own, a calm eye in the center of a storm. Her hands rested lightly on the counter, fingers hovering over the paper. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. Most people, faced with something so complex, would have recoiled immediately, laughed nervously, or simply given up, dismissing it as impossible. But she wasn't like most people. She had learned early on that challenges weren't threats, they were opportunities. Opportunities to think, to prove oneself, to rise above the noise of doubt and expectation. Her eyes scanned the paper. Lines of symbols, numbers, and patterns sprawled across it in a seemingly chaotic mess. But where others saw confusion, she saw structure. Where others saw intimidation, she saw logic. Her mind began to sort, categorize, and analyze. Each mark, each scribble, each tiny notation became a clue. Slowly, deliberately, she traced her way through the puzzle, her pen moving with precision and purpose. Around her, the diner had begun to notice. Patrons stopped mid-bite, coffee cups paused in midair, conversations dwindled into whispers. Some leaned forward, curious, intrigued by this unfolding spectacle. Most, however, still thought it was a performance, a rich man showing off, a woman humoring him. They didn't know that they were about to witness something extraordinary. She ignored them. The murmurs, the gasps, the incredulous glances from other customers. They were background noise. The only thing that mattered was the puzzle, the challenge, the delicate dance between intellect and complexity. With every calculation, every scratch of her pen, she moved closer to unraveling a problem that had been designed to intimidate, to belittle, to show the supposed superiority of wealth and status. Her mind worked like a finely tuned engine. Step by step, pattern by pattern, she began to connect the dots. A series of numbers suddenly made sense, a sequence of symbols revealed a hidden relationship, an equation twisted in her mind until the solution was no longer obscure. Each breakthrough was like a small victory, A confirmation that logic and persistence could triumph over arrogance and spectacle. The billionaire, meanwhile, watched her closely. At first, he had expected hesitation, fumbling, perhaps even polite laughter. But she had none of that. Calm, collected, confident, she wasn't intimidated by his wealth, his status, or his smug challenge. Her focus was absolute. Her gaze, steady and unwavering, betrayed nothing, yet hinted at an inner brilliance that he had rarely seen. A part of him, buried under layers of ego and cynicism, began to feel a flicker of genuine curiosity. Could she actually solve it? Minutes passed. Then 10. Then 20. The tension in the diner became palpable. The usual clatter of dishes, the chatter of waiters, the hum of conversation, all of it seemed to fade, replaced by a collective anticipation. People leaned forward, not out of mockery anymore, but out of awe. Something extraordinary was happening, and they could feel it in the air, electric and unshakable. She paused briefly, pen hovering over the paper, eyes narrowing in concentration. A particularly tricky part of the puzzle threatened to block her progress. Many would have panicked, scribbled aimlessly, or thrown up their hands in defeat. But she didn't. She took a deep breath, allowing herself a moment of calm reflection. Her mind rewound, reconsidered, and approached the problem from a new angle. Slowly, steadily, the solution began to emerge. With each step, her confidence grew. Not the kind of confidence that comes from arrogance, but the quiet, unshakable belief in one's abilities. She had faced challenges before. Life had tested her in ways that money could never buy, in situations where persistence, wit, and courage mattered far more than wealth. This puzzle was no different. It was another challenge, another test of intellect. And she was ready. The billionaire shifted in his seat, leaning forward slightly. He had faced competitors, colleagues, and rivals who were brilliant in their own right, but he had never encountered someone like her. Ordinary, yet extraordinary. Unassuming, yet undeniably sharp. And she wasn't doing it for money, or fame, or recognition. She was doing it because she could. Because the challenge demanded respect. Because she refused to bow to intimidation. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The scratch of her pen against the paper became a rhythmic heartbeat, steady, deliberate, unstoppable. She cross-referenced, recalculated, double-checked, and adjusted, her mind dancing across complex equations and patterns with remarkable agility. Even the regulars, once skeptical, were now captivated. They whispered to each other, eyes wide, as the waitress continued, unflinching, untouchable by doubt or derision. And still, she didn't rush. Precision mattered more than speed. Understanding mattered more than applause. She approached each section of the puzzle like a chess player, anticipating consequences, mapping solutions, thinking several steps ahead. Every line, every number, every symbol was a piece of the story, and she was determined to tell it perfectly. The atmosphere in the diner shifted. No longer was this about a rich man's challenge. It was about the power of human intellect, the quiet force of determination, the undeniable truth that brilliance isn't dictated by wealth, background, or status. She represented something bigger. Proof that courage and intelligence could challenge even the most arrogant, most powerful individuals. And so, step by step, she pressed on, unfazed by the whispers, the stares, and the incredulity around her. The puzzle, designed to daunt and belittle, was meeting its match. With calm, with confidence, with relentless focus, she proved that determination could illuminate what arrogance sought to obscure. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. Time itself seemed to pause, stretching every second into a tense, electric eternity. The usual clamor of the diner, the chatter of patrons, the hiss of the coffee machine, the scrape of silverware against plates, faded into a hushed silence. Everyone's attention had shifted completely to the quiet storm unfolding at the counter. They weren't just watching a woman solve a puzzle. They were witnessing a moment that would challenge the very assumptions of intelligence, power, and the limits of human capability. Her pen moved with deliberate precision, tracing lines and numbers with calm determination. Each stroke seemed effortless, yet it carried the weight of brilliance. She didn't rush. She didn't stumble. She simply solved. Step by step, she dismantled the complexity of the puzzle, untangling its threads with clarity that left the onlookers in awe. The equations, patterns, and codes that had seemed insurmountable now bowed gracefully under her methodical brilliance. The billionaire leaned back in his seat, an uneasy feeling creeping into the corners of his mind. He had expected hesitation, fumbling, maybe even polite amusement, but nothing like this. He had seen geniuses fail, prodigies stumble, and yet here was someone ordinary, by appearance, by circumstance, making light of a challenge that had been designed to intimidate, to humiliate, to assert his dominance. His fingers drummed nervously on the table. He couldn't look away, and yet part of him wished he could. As the final steps fell into place, she paused briefly, almost imperceptibly, as if savoring the moment before the culmination. And then, it was done. The puzzle lay solved, every line correct, every pattern accounted for, every symbol perfectly aligned. A collective gasp rippled through the diner. Patrons who had come in for a simple lunch found themselves holding their breath, eyes wide, mouths slightly open, stunned by the display of pure intellect before them. The billionaire's jaw dropped. Eyes wide, chest tightening with disbelief, he stared at the completed puzzle as though he were seeing an entirely new world, a world where his assumptions about intelligence, wealth, and power had been utterly upended. For decades, he had believed that genius was rare, that mastery belonged to those with years of study, access, and privilege. And yet here she was, ordinary in every visible way, yet extraordinary in ways he had never imagined. He blinked, trying to process what he had just witnessed. His mind raced through the possibilities. Had she cheated? Could it really be this simple? No, he realized, as he scanned every inch of the paper. Every step was perfect. Every calculation flawless. Every insight precise. She hadn't just solved it, she had conquered it with an elegance that bordered on artistry. The room seemed to tilt around him. His usual confidence, the kind that had carried him through boardrooms, negotiations, and international deals, felt fragile, almost laughable. He had believed that wealth and status could intimidate anyone, that most people would crumble under the weight of his challenge. And yet here she sat, serene and unflappable, a quiet force of intelligence that didn't bow to money, authority, or expectation. He leaned forward slightly, unconsciously drawn to the counter. There was a strange mix of emotions coursing through him. Shock, disbelief, admiration, and, against his own will, a touch of humility. He had underestimated her, and in doing so, he had been reminded of a fundamental truth. Brilliance does not announce itself with titles, clothes, or bank accounts. It quietly exists, waiting for the right moment to be recognized. Around him, the diner remained silent, as if the air itself were holding its breath. Patrons exchanged glances, whispering in astonishment. A few dared to speak, their voices barely audible. Did she really do that? I can't believe it. She solved it. They had never seen anything like this before. The ordinary had outshone the extraordinary, the humble had bested the arrogant, and everyone present felt the weight of witnessing something rare and unforgettable. The billionaire's mind flashed back to all the challenges he had set for himself and others. He remembered competitors who had crumbled, colleagues who had failed, and rivals who had faltered. He had watched people give up when confronted with difficulty, watched them fold under pressure, watched them underestimate the impossible. And yet here was someone who hadn't just faced the impossible. She had embraced it, dissected it, and emerged victorious, calm and composed as if it were the most natural thing in the world. For a long moment, he simply stared. Words failed him. Flattery, incredulity, even the urge to laugh, none seemed sufficient. It wasn't just that she had solved the puzzle. It was how. The patience, the focus, the clarity of thought. It was as if he were watching a master at work, someone whose mind was tuned to a level of precision he rarely encountered, someone whose brilliance had no need for spectacle because it shone unmistakably on its own. And then, slowly, the first flicker of a smile appeared on his face. Not the arrogant, smug smile he often wore in boardrooms or at high-stakes negotiations. This was a smile of respect, tinged with awe. He had been humbled, not by wealth, not by power, not by charm, but by intellect, by courage, by a mind unshaken by intimidation. He realized something profound in that moment. No amount of money, no empire, no influence could replace talent, wit, or the quiet strength of someone who believed in themselves. She hadn't just solved a puzzle, she had dismantled the walls of his arrogance, leaving him exposed to a truth he had long ignored. The diner remained quiet, but it felt as though the very atmosphere had shifted. Time seemed to flow differently now. The challenge had ended, but the impact of what had just occurred would linger for years, whispered in retellings, remembered as the day the ordinary became extraordinary in front of the world. He exhaled slowly, finally allowing himself to absorb what had happened. She had done what he thought only a genius, or perhaps himself, could accomplish. And yet here she was, smiling faintly, pen in hand, as calm and composed as she had been from the very beginning. The billionaire had been challenged, his assumptions shattered, and the waitress had proven that brilliance, courage, and focus could outshine everything else, even wealth itself. The diner was silent, yet it felt alive with anticipation. The puzzle lay solved before them, a testament to extraordinary intellect, precision, and courage. The billionaire, still leaning back in his seat, stared at the waitress in disbelief. He had intended to reward her with everything: the mansions, the yachts, the jet, perhaps even shares in his empire. But something in her demeanor told him that the usual transactions of wealth would not sway her. She was different. Her eyes met his, calm and steady, with a quiet confidence that spoke louder than words. She shook her head, almost imperceptibly, yet with unmistakable resolve. No amount of money, no promise of luxurious possessions, no offer of unimaginable wealth could tempt her. To her, those things were trivial compared to the deeper truths she carried within herself: intelligence, courage, integrity, and a mind unafraid to face challenges that others would shy away from. The billionaire's jaw tightened slightly. A wave of astonishment and, oddly, respect coursed through him. For the first time in years, someone had bested him. Not in business, not in wealth, not in influence, but in the purest form of human brilliance. Here was a person who needed nothing from him because what she possessed was far more valuable than any material treasure. Around the diner, patrons and staff began to grasp the magnitude of what had just occurred. Their astonishment turned into admiration. They had witnessed an ordinary waitress challenge the assumptions of a billionaire, solve the unsolvable, and walk away untouched by the allure of his power. The room seemed to vibrate with the silent acknowledgement of her courage and mastery. Whispers of admiration floated across tables. She didn't even blink. Can you believe she did that? She didn't even want the money. Her refusal wasn't arrogance. It was quiet, deliberate, and profoundly meaningful. It sent a ripple through the room, a reminder that human value cannot be measured in dollars, that true strength resides not in what you own but in what you are willing to stand for. She had conquered the puzzle, but more importantly, she had conquered the expectations and limitations that society often imposes. She had shown that brilliance, self-respect, and courage were treasures no one could buy or sell. The billionaire leaned forward, his hands folded, studying her. His mind raced with questions. Why wouldn't she accept? Was this some lesson, some subtle rebuke to his arrogance? Or was it simply a statement of self-worth, of independence, of someone who understood that life's greatest rewards are not always tangible? He had spent his life acquiring wealth to command respect, to exert power, to create influence. But here was someone who commanded admiration without a single coin, a single asset, a single title. Her gaze softened slightly, just enough to acknowledge the magnitude of his reaction, yet she remained composed. In that glance, there was no judgment, only the quiet affirmation that she valued her integrity and intellect above all else. She had proven that she could rise to any challenge and had done so not for reward, but because she could. Because she had the courage to face what others feared, the clarity to see through complexity, and the confidence to trust in her own abilities. The lesson hung in the air, almost palpable. Wealth is seductive, power is persuasive, and influence is commanding, but none of these can replace wit, courage, or a fearless heart. The waitress embodied a truth that transcended money. The real measure of human potential lies in intellect, character, and the ability to confront challenges without fear of failure or intimidation. Her actions spoke louder than gold, louder than status, louder even than the billionaire himself. For him, it was a humbling revelation. He had lived in a world where every obstacle could be overcome with money, where every problem had a price, where influence often trumped ability. And yet here was a person untouched by such assumptions, who refused to be swayed by material offers, who valued something far deeper. It was a reminder that wealth, for all its power, is limited in its ability to shape human excellence. As the diners watched, she carefully gathered her apron, smoothing it with deliberate calm, and returned to her duties. The act was simple, almost mundane, but in its simplicity lay profound meaning. She had proven herself not through showmanship, but through competence, poise, and the quiet assertion of her worth. The billionaire, still seated, felt a strange mixture of admiration, introspection, and a touch of envy. Here was someone whose value could not be quantified, someone whose legacy would be carried in minds and hearts rather than bank accounts. The room slowly returned to normal, yet the energy had shifted irrevocably. Patrons whispered, laughed softly, and shook their heads in disbelief. The ordinary had become extraordinary. The humble had bested the arrogant. And in the midst of it all, the waitress remained unassuming, focused, and utterly unshaken, a living embodiment of resilience, intelligence, and integrity. The billionaire finally spoke, his voice low, almost reverent. "You didn't need it," he said. "You didn't need any of it." She smiled faintly, a subtle acknowledgment, not of triumph over him, but of a deeper understanding. Life's greatest victories are often silent, unseen, and personal. The puzzle had been a test of intellect, but her decision was a testament to character. In that moment, everyone present understood the lesson. True power does not lie in money, influence, or material possessions. True power lies in the mind that refuses to bow, the heart that remains fearless, and the courage to choose integrity over temptation. Intelligence without fear, confidence without arrogance, and self-worth without dependence. These are treasures no billionaire can bestow, no empire can purchase, and no wealth can replicate. As she moved through the diner, returning to her work with quiet composure, the lesson remained etched in the minds of all who had witnessed it. No amount of wealth can replace wit, courage, and a fearless heart. She had solved the impossible puzzle, defied expectations, and walked away richer in the ways that truly matter, respected, admired, and unshaken by the weight of arrogance or power. The billionaire sat silently, absorbing it all, a sense of humility washing over him. In that moment, he realized that life's most profound lessons are rarely taught by money, status, or authority, but by courage, intelligence, and the extraordinary bravery of someone unafraid to rise above the ordinary. And in that quiet diner, in the presence of a woman who had proven it all, the world seemed a little more extraordinary, a little more fair, and a lot more inspiring.